I did not lose my faith because I stopped believing in God. I lost it because I learned where God actually comes from. And that knowledge did not come from a church, a book, or a moment of weakness. It came from standing guard in a place that officially does not exist, watching something that was never meant to speak to a human being like me. What I learned there did not destroy belief. It destroyed certainty. And once certainty is gone, it never comes back the same way. People think Area 51 is about spacecraft, secret aircraft, or strange lights in the sky. That version is convenient because it keeps the conversation shallow. What I was assigned to protect had nothing to do with machines, propulsion, or weapons. It had everything to do with origin, purpose, and why human beings instinctively look upward when they search for meaning. The truth buried beneath that desert is not technological. It is existential, and that is why it has never been allowed to surface. I am not telling you this to convince you of anything, and I'm not asking you to believe every word I say. I am telling you because what I was shown forced me to confront something far more unsettling than the idea of aliens. It forced me to confront the possibility that everything we think we understand about God is incomplete. Not wrong, but unfinished. And that difference matters more than most people realize. The entity I guarded did not threaten me, did not attack me, and did not offer power or salvation. It offered understanding. The kind that rearranges how you see your own species. The kind that makes you realize some truths are not hidden to protect us from fear, but to protect those in power from losing control. I did not leave Area 51 with answers. I left with questions I was never supposed to ask. And once you hear what the alien told me about God, you will understand why they never let me leave. Before we go any further, if you enjoy stories that challenge what we think we know, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments where you are watching from. Before any of that happened, I was not a man searching for meaning or revelation. I was searching for silence. I spent most of my adult life working contract security for joint operations that never appeared on official records. Not special forces in the ceremonial sense, but the kind of work that exists between agencies, where jurisdiction blurs and accountability disappears. Black sites, temporary facilities, assets that needed guarding without questions being asked. That was my world, and I was good at it. By the time Area 51 entered my life, I was already burned out in ways I did not know how to name. My marriage had collapsed under years of absence and emotional distance. Alcohol became less of a problem and more of a routine, something to slow my thoughts enough to sleep. I did not hate my country, but I no longer believed in its moral clarity. I had seen too many compromises made in the name of security to trust simple narratives about good and evil. Religion was something I had quietly set aside years earlier, not out of anger and not because I thought God was imaginary. I just could not reconcile the language of worship with the realities I had witnessed. Prayers sounded hollow when measured against mass graves and classified casualties. Faith felt like a vocabulary that no longer matched the world I operated in. Still, I never stopped wondering if something larger existed beyond human systems and human cruelty. When the offer came, it did not feel like an opportunity. It felt like a continuation. A private contractor role, extreme clearance, long rotations, and a level of secrecy that made previous assignments look casual by comparison. The screening process focused less on belief and more on psychological fracture points. They wanted people who had already lost simple answers. People who would not panic if reality shifted beneath their feet. I did not accept the position because I wanted truth. I accepted it because I wanted numbness. I wanted structure, routine, and something that would drown out the noise in my head. I had no interest in aliens' disclosure or cosmic secrets. At that point in my life, meaning felt like a luxury for people who had not seen what I had seen. That is what made me dangerous. I was not loyal to religion, ideology, or myth. I was empty enough to listen. And that is exactly why I was trusted to stand in front of something that would change how I understood God forever. The call came on an ordinary weekday morning, the kind of morning where nothing important is supposed to happen. No classified ringtone, no warning, just a calm professional voice that already knew my name, my service history, and details that were never written down anywhere official. The woman introduced herself without rank, without agency, and without explanation. She spoke as if the conversation was already agreed upon, as if I had been expecting it. When she asked if I was available for a secure interview, it did not sound like a question. The interviews did not take place on any base I recognized. They happened in neutral buildings, rented offices, places designed to leave no memory behind. The people across the table never identified themselves, never corrected each other, and never explained who they represented. Instead, they asked questions that had nothing to do with combat or tactics. They wanted to know how I handled moral contradiction, how I lived with decisions that had no clean outcome, how I reacted when authority conflicted with conscience. One of them asked me what I would do if I were ordered to protect something dangerous without being told why it mattered. Another asked how I would respond if I learned a truth that destabilized my identity but benefited the world. They spoke about identity collapse as if it were an expected outcome, not a risk. At one point, a man across from me used the phrase non-human intelligence once, clinically, without emphasis, and then moved on as if it were no more unusual than discussing weather patterns. There were no forms to sign at first, no mention of location, no promise of heroism. They talked about isolation, long rotations, and information that could never be shared. They described the assignment as custodial rather than operational, guarding rather than fighting, preserving rather than confronting. It was clear they were not looking for belief or loyalty. They were looking for containment of reaction. At the end of the final interview, the woman leaned forward and said something that still echoes in my head. They did not ask if I believed in God. They asked what I would do if I learned God was never what I thought. The transfer did not involve marked aircraft or dramatic secrecy. I was flown in on an unremarkable plane, driven across empty desert roads, and escorted through checkpoints that felt more ceremonial than defensive. No one raised their voice. No one rushed. Every movement was deliberate, practiced, and calm in a way that made my skin crawl. This was not a place that feared intrusion. This was a place that assumed obedience. The facility was not structured like a military base or a research lab. It was divided into zones, each separated by heavy doors and long corridors that curved just enough to prevent clear lines of sight. The deeper we went, the quieter it became. Not silent, but subdued, as if sound itself was being asked to behave. The walls were smooth stone and dark metal, materials that absorbed light rather than reflecting it. The architecture felt old, not in age, but in intention. Technology existed everywhere, but none of it looked new. Consoles were embedded into surfaces instead of standing apart. Displays glowed softly rather than brightly. There were no warning signs, no blinking alerts, no sense of urgency. The guards stationed throughout the zones did not look tense or afraid. They stood relaxed, hands folded, eyes forward, as if they were attending a ceremony rather than securing something dangerous. As we moved through the central access corridor, I realized the layout resembled something closer to a place of worship than a facility. Wide chambers opened into narrower passageways, then expanded again, guiding movement the way cathedrals guide congregations. Every step felt intentional, as if the building itself was designed to prepare you psychologically for what came next. This was not a place built to study. It was a place built to contain meaning. No one explained what I would be guarding. No one needed to. By the time we reached my assigned zone, I understood that whatever existed deeper inside this complex was not hidden because it was dangerous to humanity. It was hidden because humanity was dangerous to it. And standing there, surrounded by quiet walls and reverent silence, I realized I was not being assigned to protect a secret. I was being assigned to protect a boundary humanity was never meant to cross unprepared. I saw it for the first time through reinforced glass that did not reflect my face back at me. The chamber was large, circular, and dimly lit from above, not to illuminate the subject, but to keep it partially concealed. What stood inside was not gray, not insect-like, not anything I recognized from public imagination. It was upright, subtly humanoid, with proportions close enough to human to be unsettling, but wrong in ways that were difficult to explain. Its limbs were slightly too long, its posture too still, and its presence felt deliberate, as if it were choosing not to move rather than being unable to. The restraints were visible but minimal, thin bands of energy rather than physical chains, positioned more as boundaries than force. It did not struggle. It did not pace. It stood with its head slightly tilted, hands relaxed at its sides, watching the room with what I can only describe as patience. The skin was smooth but not reflective, carrying a muted, almost matte texture that absorbed light. There were no visible weapons, no claws, no teeth meant for violence. And yet every human in that zone behaved as if they were the ones being evaluated. When I stepped closer to the glass, the alien's attention shifted. Not abruptly, not dramatically, but with intention. Its eyes met mine, and I felt something I had not felt in years. Recognition, not familiarity, but awareness. As if it understood what I was before I understood what it was. There was no fear in that gaze, no hostility, no curiosity either. It felt like being noticed by something that had been waiting. The room around me suddenly felt smaller, heavier, like sound itself had thickened. I realized my breathing had slowed without conscious effort. My hand rested near my weapon out of habit, but nothing in me wanted to raise it. The alien did not move closer. It did not reach out. It simply remained present, and that presence carried weight. Not pressure, not threat, but gravity. The kind that pulls thought inward. What unsettled me most was not how alien it looked, but how human reactions around it felt distorted. Scientists spoke in clipped tones, guards avoided lingering, supervisors never stayed long. It was as if everyone sensed the prolonged exposure carried risk. Not physical risk, but something deeper. As if too much attention would invite understanding, and understanding was the real danger. I walked away from that chamber knowing one thing with absolute clarity. Whatever that being was, it was not hostile. It was not imprisoned because it was violent. It was contained because it was capable of something far more disruptive. And standing there, unseen behind glass, I realized the truth no briefing would ever admit. The alien was calm. The humans were afraid. The rules were issued after first contact, not before. And that alone should have been a warning. They were printed on a single laminated sheet, handed to me without ceremony, without explanation, and without room for questions. The language was clinical, stripped of emotion, written by people who had already learned the consequences of disobedience. These were not safety guidelines. They were psychological containment measures. The first rule addressed eye contact. Do not maintain direct visual engagement for more than a few seconds. If prolonged contact occurs, document the duration and request immediate reassignment. There was no mention of aggression or threat, only exposure. The second rule concerned distance. Maintain a minimum proximity buffer, even when barriers are present. Do not lean, rest, or linger near containment boundaries. Again, no explanation. Only instruction. The third rule was the one that unsettled me most. Emotional response must be reported. Not just fear or anxiety, but empathy, curiosity, or identification. Any sense of connection was classified as a cognitive incident requiring evaluation. They did not want guards who felt. They wanted witnesses who remained inert. That told me more than any briefing ever could. Then there was the rule that made no sense at all. If the asset initiates contact, you are not to respond. Ever. No clarification. No definition of what contact meant. Verbal, physical, visual, or something else entirely. The rule existed because someone before me had responded. And whatever happened afterward was severe enough that they never wanted it repeated. At the time, I thought the rules were meant to protect us from manipulation. I assumed the danger lay in what the alien could do. It took me far too long to realize the truth. The rules were not there to protect humanity from the alien. They were there to protect humanity from what the alien could reveal. The first contact did not happen the way movies prepare you for. There was no voice, no sound, no visible gesture that signaled intention. It began as pressure behind my eyes, subtle at first, like the early stages of a headache. Then came emotion, not mine, but placed gently inside my awareness, sadness layered with patience and something older than grief. I felt loneliness so vast it could not be measured in years, only in eras. The alien was not reaching outward to dominate or persuade. It was allowing me to feel what it had carried alone for longer than human history. Images followed the emotion, not as pictures, but as fragments of experience. Vast stretches of darkness broken by stars that were unfamiliar. Long periods of observation, waiting, recording, never intervening unless necessary. I felt regret, not for harm done, but for silence maintained too long. The alien had watched civilizations rise and fall, not just on Earth, but elsewhere, always guided by the same restraint. It had known suffering not as pain inflicted, but as the burden of restraint, of watching mistakes unfold without permission to interfere. As the exchange deepened, I understood something that unsettled me more than any revelation. This being was old. Not ancient in the way ruins are ancient, but old in the way processes are old. It had existed before humanity learned language, before we learned to bury our dead, before we learned to ask the sky questions. I felt its memory stretch backward past the point where human history even begins to register. And still, it watched us with care. What affected me most was not its power, but its restraint. It could have overwhelmed me, drowned my mind in knowledge, erased resistance. Instead, it adjusted, slowed, softened the connection when my breathing changed. That alone told me more than any threat display ever could. This was not a conqueror. This was a witness. And witnesses do not interfere unless something has gone terribly wrong. Then the emotion shifted. Curiosity replaced sorrow, not about humanity as a whole, but about me. It felt my doubt, my exhaustion, my distance from belief, and did not judge it. It accepted it as data. I sensed that my brokenness was not a flaw, but a condition that allowed this connection to exist without shattering me. In that moment, I realized why others were removed from proximity. Not everyone could withstand being seen this clearly. Before the connection faded, the alien placed one final thought into my mind. Not an answer, not a command, but a question, heavy with implication and sadness. Why do humans worship what created them, but never ask why they were created? The next exchange did not feel like communication. It felt like alignment. Concepts arranged themselves in my mind without resistance, as if something long dormant had finally been activated. Humanity, the alien conveyed, was never designed to serve or obey. We were not created as followers or worshippers. We were designed as observers, capable of perceiving complexity, contradiction, and meaning simultaneously. That ability was rare, and it was intentional. God, as humans describe it, was never a singular being watching from above. It was a process unfolding across unimaginable scales of time and intelligence. A system of consciousness that grows by integrating perspectives, experiences, and choices from countless civilizations. Not a ruler issuing commands, but an accumulation of awareness refining itself. God was not finished because nothing that evolves ever is. Religion emerged as an interface, not a deception. Early humans lacked the language to describe contact with something that vast, so they translated experience into symbols, stories, and commandments. Those frameworks preserved essential truths while distorting their origin. Worship became easier than understanding. Obedience became simpler than participation. Over time, the interface replaced the function it was meant to serve. Free will was not an accident of evolution. It was the entire point. Humanity was designed to choose, even when those choices led to suffering or chaos. A consciousness that cannot choose cannot contribute anything meaningful to a collective process. Predictable beings add no insight. Our unpredictability, our emotional volatility, our capacity for compassion and cruelty were features, not errors. We were meant to struggle before we could integrate. The alien did not speak of salvation or judgment. It spoke of readiness. Humanity was never meant to be lifted or rescued. We were meant to mature, to reach a point where belief could give way to understanding without collapsing identity. That was why premature revelation was dangerous. Not because truth is harmful, but because timing matters when consciousness evolves. I understood then why the facility existed. Not to protect humanity from aliens, but to delay humanity from confronting itself. Control was easier than preparation. Secrecy was safer than growth. The danger was not that humans would learn the truth. The danger was that they would learn it without being allowed to choose what to do with it. Standing there, absorbing knowledge that rewrote my understanding of existence, I realized something deeply unsettling. If God is a process and humanity is meant to participate rather than submit, then belief was never the goal. Responsibility was. And that meant the future of our species depended not on faith, but on whether we were willing to grow beyond the comfort of being told what we are. When the alien finally allowed the full concept to settle into my mind, it did not arrive as a revelation of power. It arrived as grief. God, as humanity has imagined it, was never a solitary being watching from beyond existence. God was a collective consciousness formed over time by countless intelligent civilizations, each contributing perspective, memory, and experience. Not a throne, not a ruler, not a judge, but an ever-growing accumulation of awareness. A living process shaped by participation rather than obedience. Humanity was never meant to worship this collective. We were meant to join it, eventually. But we are unfinished, still early in development, still unstable in ways that make premature integration dangerous. That was why contact was limited, filtered, translated. Not because we were unworthy, but because we were not ready. A consciousness that cannot tolerate ambiguity cannot survive awareness on that scale. What humans called angels were not divine spirits descending from a supernatural realm. They were early envoys, observers, and guides from civilizations already integrated into the collective. They appeared luminous and overwhelming because advanced consciousness changes perception. Their messages were not commands from God, but attempts to prepare humanity for participation rather than submission. Over time, reverence replaced understanding, and symbols replaced meaning. Miracles were not violations of reality. They were interventions misunderstood by minds without scientific context. Healing was advanced biological influence. Prophecy was probability modeling, interpreted through intuition. Visions were contact filtered through belief systems that lacked language for technology or cognition beyond human scale. Each intervention was meant to guide development, not to inspire worship. But worship was easier than responsibility. The tragedy was not that humanity misunderstood God. The tragedy was that the misunderstanding became institutionalized. Religions preserved fragments of truth while freezing them in place, turning dynamic process into rigid doctrine. Instead of evolving alongside awareness, belief became static. God became an authority to obey rather than a horizon to approach. and humanity learned to kneel when it was meant to grow. The alien conveyed something that left a hollow weight in my chest. God was never watching humanity the way a parent watches a child. God was waiting for us to reach a level of psychological maturity where choice could replace fear. Waiting for a species capable of facing its origins without collapsing into nihilism or fanaticism. Waiting for beings who could accept that meaning is not given, but earned through conscious participation. That was why the truth had been delayed, hidden, distorted, and controlled. Not because it would destroy faith, but because it would destroy authority built on certainty. A species that understands God as a collective process cannot be ruled through fear of judgment. A humanity that sees itself as unfinished participants rather than fallen servants becomes impossible to control. And standing there, absorbing this truth, I realized something devastating. God was not absent from human suffering. God was incomplete without us. Once I understood what the alien represented, the facility around me changed shape in my mind. The glass, the zones, the rules, none of it existed to protect humanity from a threat. It existed to protect humanity from itself. The alien was not a prisoner in the conventional sense. It was a delay mechanism. A way to slow our species from reaching a truth that would destabilize every structure built on belief, authority, and fear. The government did not fear invasion. It feared awakening. A population that realizes God is not a judge, but a process cannot be governed the same way. Institutions built on moral certainty collapse when certainty dissolves. Faith systems lose their leverage. Political power loses its mythological backing. Control becomes fragile when obedience is no longer framed as divine or inevitable. That was why the alien was contained quietly, respectfully, and relentlessly. Not tortured, not interrogated violently, but isolated. Prevented from finishing the conversation it had started thousands of years ago. The truth it carried was not dangerous because it was false. It was dangerous because it was destabilizing. A species that understands its role as unfinished participants becomes unpredictable in ways no system can fully manage. I began to notice patterns that had been invisible before. Reassignments that followed moments of curiosity. Psychological evaluations triggered by empathy rather than fear. Careers ending not for mistakes, but for asking the wrong questions. The facility did not remove threats. It removed listeners. Those who leaned too close to understanding were quietly redirected, medicated, or erased from operational relevance. Standing watch outside that chamber, I realized the most horrifying truth of all. Humanity was not being protected from aliens. Humanity was being protected from its own potential. The cover-up was not about secrecy. It was about timing. And the people in charge had decided they would rather control the pace of evolution than risk losing their place within it. The choice did not arrive dramatically. There was no alarm, no confrontation, no moment that felt heroic. It arrived during a routine shift, when routine had already lost its meaning. I understood then that I had three options. Obedience meant continuing to guard a boundary I now knew was artificial. Silence meant preserving my own safety while participating in delay. Truth meant destabilization, not just for others, but for myself. I did not free the alien. I did not sabotage systems or leak classified footage. What I did was smaller and far more permanent. I altered a single report, a minor annotation buried inside routine documentation, a reclassification of observed cognitive effects from non-applicable to confirmed. It was the kind of change that would pass unnoticed at first and quietly propagate through internal systems. That single adjustment forced mandatory review protocols. It created paper trails that could not be erased without exposure. It ensured that future personnel would be briefed differently, with questions they were never meant to ask. I did not reveal the truth to the world. I ensured the truth could no longer be completely contained. I knew the consequences would come later: reassignment, surveillance, eventual removal from sensitive access. But I also knew something else. Once a system begins questioning itself, control becomes impossible to fully restore. Humanity does not awaken all at once. It starts with doubt. As I walked away from that chamber for the last time, I understood the weight of what I had done. Not rebellion, not betrayal, participation. I chose truth, not because it was safe, but because it was inevitable. And once chosen, it cannot be unchosen. I am still alive. That surprises people more than anything else. I was not arrested, not imprisoned, not publicly erased. I was reassigned, monitored, evaluated, and slowly moved away from anything that mattered. My access narrowed. My clearances expired quietly. My name stopped appearing on schedules that led underground. Survival was not mercy. It was containment of a different kind. The alien is no longer in the chamber. Officially, it was relocated. Unofficially, no one uses its designation anymore. The space where it stood has been sealed, repurposed, stripped of significance. And yet sometimes, when I pass that corridor in my memory, I still feel the same pressure behind my eyes. Recognition does not require proximity. That is something the rules never mentioned. The world outside has not changed in any visible way. Governments still function. Religions still preach. People still pray, doubt, argue, and suffer the way they always have. No announcements were made. No skies opened. But something subtle has shifted. Conversations are different. Questions are sharper. Certainty feels thinner than it used to. I see it in people who have never been near Area 51. In sudden loss of faith that does not lead to despair, but to curiosity. In moments where belief gives way to responsibility. In the growing discomfort with being told what to think about meaning and purpose. These are not coincidences. These are early symptoms. The alien told me God was not watching us. God was waiting for us. Waiting for a species capable of choosing awareness over obedience. Waiting for minds strong enough to face their origin without collapsing. Waiting for participants, not worshippers. And now that you have heard this, you have to ask yourself something. If God is real, and God is becoming, and humanity is part of that process, then the question is not whether you believe. The question is whether you are already changing. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who enjoys unsettling stories that make you think. Drop a comment and tell us what part of this story stayed with you the most, and let us know where you are watching from.